Good afternoon and welcome to the online training program on holistic assessment. This is the second webinar in the series of 4 webinars which we are conducting on holistic assessment. And today's webinar, the expert will be talking about planning to assess learning. And before I invite Puchika ma'am, I would like to inform our participants that these webinars, there are 2 more webinars which are going to be conducted on 29th October and 1st November. And the link for assessment will be open on 1st November at 5 p.m. So since we have been receiving emails regarding the opening of the assessment link, so I would like to inform that the assessment link will open on 1st November after the last webinar is over, so at 5 p.m. And so please and do attend all the webinars so that you can successfully complete the assessment and get your certificates. So today's, yeah. So now I invite Puchika ma'am to introduce Deepti Sahani ma'am from Mahatattva. And after that, I think she can start with the session. Puchika ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar for the holistic assessment. So, Ms. Deepti Sani is a thought leader in technology integration and strategy. She completed her certificate of educational studies from the College of Teachers Institute of Education, London, UK, and has trained in teaching languages through technology from Trinity College, UK. And she has an experience in technology integration for about last 20 years. And also she is the Chief Executive Officer for Mahatattva. So thank you so much. And over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Namaskar, everyone. Good afternoon. And it's a pleasure to be back here for the second webinar, that is planning to assess the learning. So just to give you a little background, in the first webinar, we had spoken about how to plan your learning, keeping the end in mind, as we have introduced continuous and holistic assessment in the NEP. We are looking at the big picture of learning, teaching and learning in the classroom. Now, when we talk about assessment, which is the engine which drives the learning, we have to understand that there are certain nitty-gritties that have to be looked at before we go on to that. So I'm just going to share my screen now. So as you can see, we are going to look at planning to assess the learning. So the stress here is on planning. The stress here is on the strategies. So we will look at the various progressive strategies or pedagogies with assessment in mind. So whatever strategies we are talking about, we will look at what are the ways, what are the skills and competencies, what are the assessment bits that we can keep in mind while we are transacting the pedagogy in the classroom. We will also learn how to match the assessment. What is the correct assessment that can be matched with the progressive pedagogy? We will also get clarity on how to identify criteria. So a whole lot of you use rubrics in your classroom. So how do we integrate the criteria and the defining properties of the criteria so that when the children are actually doing your project or assignments that has been given by you, they are in the know. of what is the criteria and what do I actually have to do in this assignment or the project. So we match the expectations exactly to what the children are doing. So here we will also talk about how to create these rubrics with the children preferably and in child speak, so that the children are acquainted with the rubrics that the teachers are going to use to grade them. So these are the objectives for the webinar today. So let us talk about the strategies first. So what are those strategies that we should be doing in our classroom so that we can actually get the children to do self-reflection, to do peer reflection, to be able to, articulate whatever that they want to say in a better way, and as a result of it, they get into deeper learning. So when we talk about traditional teaching or traditional learning, I prefer to use the word learning because that's something which is, encompasses the entire teaching and learning scenario in today's world, because the teachers are learners too. There are this comparison you must have seen a lot many times. When you do traditional learning, what happens, and when you do progressive learning, what happens. What I want to point out here is that there are certain traditional things, there are certain traditional learning strategies which are very, very important as well. I mean, something like storytelling, which is a very traditional, very old Pathshala type of a learning, where people used to sit together and read and learn about their tradition and their culture. Now, that is not something which can go away, because that is the most beautiful thing that the children can learn, and that kind of learning can happen even from a grandmother or a grandfather. So traditional learning is something which is, very, very, I would say, covered in certain things that are important. But at the same time, there are certain negatives to it as well, because traditional learning has a lot of rote learning. The concepts are, presented as facts, and you have to learn those. They're superficial sort of a learning, and when you do the evaluation, it's mostly an 8 out of 10 or a 2 out of 10. So qualitative evaluation is done mostly. But when you look at progressive learning, you involve the children in creating the learning objectives, like we spoke in the previous webinar. The curriculum is integrated. You try and integrate the entire thing in the various subject areas, and you can actually get a whole lot of subjects together, so the children see the big picture. They just don't see the science of it or the English of it. Also, I think when we talk about progressive learning, the process is very important vis-a-vis the product, which is maybe an assignment or a research paper or a prototype. That is not important. Yes, of course, at the end of it, you need to be able to produce something as a learner. But in the progressive learning, the process becomes very important. Also, I think inquiry plays a big role in progressive learning, and we will be talking about inquiry learning almost for the entirety of our sessions today. So we will look at deeper learning and henceforth authentic assessment. So because we are going to talk about the various progressive pedagogies, we will look at each pedagogy that we talk about. We will look at what is the authentic assessment that can be attached to it. So what does this authentic assessment actually mean? So when we take an approach where we measure the student performance in a direct, relevant way, wherein we are involving the children, we are giving them authentic, real life situations where they can relate to it, that is where you can actually measure what the children are doing and how much have they learned. So how much, whatever learning that you have designed for them, you have certain learning objectives for them. So you can totally define whether the learning objectives have been met or not. So how do you do that? There are various evidences, of course. We spoke about them in the previous webinar as well. We are looking at reports, journals, speeches, videos, interviews, all of these, which will help you understand how much have the children learned. But how should you do that? You should do it often. Most of us in our schools, we are so bogged down with our routines that, there's an annual day, there's a sports day. We are not doing a formative assessment very regularly, especially in the middle school onwards, because we have the little children where we do a lot of documentation, we take pictures, we do a narrative, we make sure that the children are, showing the progression from where they were in January and where they are in March. All of that is done a lot for the little ones, but not too often for the older children. So do it often, make it small. It can be a small activity that you do, something like an observation or a think, pair, share, where your children are recording a 1-minute piece of what do they think about the concept that they have learned today, something which is easy to assess for you as well, and it doesn't come as a big sort of a bulk that you have to review for the children. So why do they say that in the new way of learning, teaching and learning, we should involve the children, and we should do a whole lot of self-reflection, a whole lot of peer reflection? Because if you increase the number of ways and methods that you are assessing children, it is not humanly possible to keep track of the 45-50 children in the classroom. So you have to get your children to be self-regulated, and you have to get them to reflect often, so that yes, you are doing the assessment which where the meaning needs to be substantiated, where you need them to actually qualify by saying they understand these learning objectives, but there are small steps in the middle where they can do it themselves as well, or you can put in peer evaluation, and that is something that we will be talking more about in webinar 3. So you have to also break it down. So you do it often and you break it down. So whatever assessment that you have planned for, the big picture assessment, break it down into little bits so that at every step, the student or the peer is evaluating, and the teacher is evaluating their evaluation and giving constructive feedback. So when you are doing your entire process, there are certain checks for learning in the middle, wherein either the students do self-reflection, or they get a peer reflection, or they get a teacher feedback. So it can be multiple ways where you are engaging with the children, but you have broken down the entire assessment package that you have to do by the end of it. You have to go backwards. This is something that we have been talking about right from the beginning, that we start with the end in mind. So this is the crux of the assessment process that we are talking about, that when you think about what are the children going to learn, so that assessment bit is something that you should keep in mind when you're doing the formatives and the summatives, and you design the lessons accordingly to that. So you go backwards, do a backward design. You cater to the students' interest. Now, this is something that differentiation, multiple learning styles, the VAC learners. People say that 87% of children in your classroom are VAC learners, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So if you devise strategies which covers these 3 categories, 87% of your children have got it, and you can make sure that these kind of activities are integrated. But what about the other 13%? So we need to understand the learning profiles. So this is something which is, I think, comes across very strongly in the NEP as well, where it talks about how will you differentiate your learning. So the first step to that is to know your learner. So have little checks in the middle of your the entire year, where you are getting them to reflect on what is the kind of learning that makes them understand well. So once you have the children, and once they have defined their own learning styles, then it becomes easier for you also to define their sort of a project, or whatever that the end product that you have decided for the lesson per se. So you need to understand that children, the dopamine and the endorphins play a very important role. So when you do something which is for the interest of the students, it will get them to engage in that better, engage in that more wholeheartedly. And of course, as a result of that, the learning will be more. We are going to talk about this again and again, the self-reflection. And tomorrow again, we will be doing, sorry, not tomorrow, in the next webinar, we will again be talking about the self-reflection and the self-assessment. We have to understand that children are very, very intuitive. You know, once you're, even if it's a, you know, summative assessment, and I'm not talking about formative because formative has reflection inbuilt in it. But if you, even if you're doing a summative assessment where they've created a project or a diorama or a role play or whatever that you've asked them to do, ask them to look at the project and reflect. So that is something which should become the culture of the classroom, the culture of learning with your students, wherein whatever we do, now we are going to reflect on it. So never estimate that power of reflection that can be built very easily in your lessons. So if you look at the entirety of the curriculum, you know, a lot of people talk about, let's do inquiry-based learning, let's do project-based learning. Right in the middle on the left-hand side is Mahatattva's design thinking cycle. People talk about critical thinking. They talk about creative, then they talk about constructivism. We also spoke about Bloom's last time, you know, how to take the children from, you know, lower order thinking skills to higher order thinking skills, all of them being very important depending upon the stage of the learning of the student. So all of this actually confuses everybody. You know, what are we trying to do? We are trying to do a whole sort of things together, and we really don't know, you know, how to plug it in. So my advice here right now, when we are thinking about the entire thing of what is happening in the classroom, when you think of the entire learning experience as a line of inquiry, this is something which will make your life easier. So whatever skill sets, whatever competencies that you are thinking of integrating in your learning objectives, it's very important for you to identify, you know, what are the steps that the child is going to take. So that is where your planning, your strategies planning will come into, you know, force. Now, what are the children going to do? What are they going to be doing at any point in time? So we are looking at inquiry right now. So most of the people say that, you know, the wonder from our children's lives have gone. So anything that you want to ask them, they just Google it and they don't wonder. And if you remember, when we were in school, there were a lot of wonder opportunities. You know, we used to wonder as to why the sun comes on, or how the clouds are formed, and how does the seed become a tree. I think that wonder needs to come back into the classrooms. The children need to base their learning on questions, on inquiry, and that is something which will lead to your problem solving, your reasoning, your creative thinking. All of that will come into play. From a teacher's point of view, I think when you are moving that curiosity, when you're looking at that, that level where the children are actually moving towards the wonder that you want to get into the classroom, you can very easily take them to critical thinking or design thinking, or we were looking at Bloom's, we were looking at constructivism. So at any point in time, you can decide that, yes, if I do the design thinking cycle in this, the children will be able to create a prototype, they will be able to empathize, they will take out different iterations of the same prototype. We can give them constructive feedback, and if the product is not nicely made, they can go back to the design board and the design thinking becomes cyclic for them. So depending upon what the task is, that is why I am stressing on the point planning to assess. So your planning, again, your pedagogies need to be thought about very carefully as to what are you going to get the children to do, because that will define your assessment, that you have already decided what that assessment is going to look like. Because to come again to the learning objectives have been done. So the learning objectives are there the assessments you have decided that if the child is able to do this point, this learning objective, tick is done. So the middle meat of the entire learning are your learning strategies. So if I can just show you an example. So here is an inquiry task, which I had done in one of the workshops. So without saying, this question came up later. There were certain vocabulary words which were given to people on a Google Doc. So Google Doc is something which is a word processor and can be accessed by anybody who has the link. So people went on and they found out, they Googled, what is the meaning of these words. So they went on and they did this. And this question came up later. What is pollination? So this is what was the line of inquiry. They looked at the various vocabulary words which were given by me. They put the meaning and they added an image to it. And this was something which came from the children. So what are we going to do? What is the learning objective? We will find out what is pollination and the various types of pollination. It was not me saying, okay, now let us open up page number so and so, and this is what we are going to do. Hence, this line of inquiry is something that came from the children. So once you have got to that level of your learning, you can actually get the children to define their learning for themselves. So this was an example of children creating their own inquiry points, and that was on pollination. So I'm moving ahead. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to read this. So we are talking about the various things that we can do in a classroom. And I don't want to negate the teacher mindset, the teacher attitude, and the non-threatening environment in the classroom. Now, if you look at this example, the teacher has begun the lesson and she is saying that she has asked students to interpret the first 2 lines. And one child volunteers and she says no, he says no, that's not the answer. And then another student said something that this poem reminded her of a voyage. And the student said she's supposed to be thinking of only the first 2 lines and not the whole poem. So at any and every point, the teacher has not encouraged, has not spoken about going further, has just been very, very critical about what the students are saying. Now have a look at this example. Again, I'll give you 2 minutes to read this. So these are 9th graders, and the teacher has to give them an experiment, and it is completely experiential. The students have been given resources which have been carefully selected. The teacher has asked them to frame a few questions, and he has given them the rules for handling the material safely, and then he has given them student time to design their own experiments. Now, at any point in time, he's going around and he's looking at what the children are doing, what they are concluding, and then he is, getting them to think deeper by getting them to, pose contradictions to their responses. Even if they're correct, he's telling them, okay, now you elaborate on this. And see the result. In the first example, the children didn't want to speak after the 2 or 3 times the teacher responded to them in the way he did. And in this one here, the children want to continue, they want to go ahead, and they want to actually do this experiment even after the class is done. They want to come back in the break and do it. So when we are talking about the progressive pedagogies that we are going to talk about in a great length today, what are the progressive pedagogies in relation to the assessment strategies that we can use, I want you to keep in mind two or three things: that the classroom environment should be non-threatening, the teacher should be encouraging, and the learning should be mostly student-led. So the student voice and the student choice. You have heard about student agency. So that is something which should be profound. And of course, there should be in the middle checks for learning, wherein you will go in or the peers can give feedback to each other. But the fact of the matter is that this is not a fixed kind of a learning. This is something which goes on to prove their own convictions as to what they thought or what they predicted is going to happen to this certain phenomena. So we are talking about lines of inquiry, and whatever you are talking about in the classroom, whether it is creative thinking, critical thinking, problem solving, design thinking, constructivism, experiential learning, all of this sits in the lines of inquiry. You have a classroom culture where, or a school culture where the lines of inquiry are something which the children have very, very nicely entrenched into their own thinking. And you will see that your entire environment, the entire community will change. And how does that happen? How do you ignite the inquiry and wonder? And this is a beautiful example of the little children, and they were asked to measure length of the playground. Now here, no meters, no feet, no scales, nothing has been given to the children. They've just been told that they have to measure the playground. This is an example of what we were talking about, the lines of inquiry that we were discussing at the beginning, where we said inquiry is something which will get the children to do whatever that you're planning to do. So rather than telling them this what a ruler or a tape looks like, she just told them that, okay, reflect how what is the size of our school playground. So some of the children they did a handspan, some of them did it in feet, some of them said that they know that a doctor said that she is 4 feet tall, so she knows that there is a unit to it. But you can see that there is a conversation happening and they are trying to understand what it is. So one child, when he measured one part of the school playground, got maybe 100 spans, and another student got 120 for the same length. So the conclusion that you need standardized measurement came from the children. So this activity is something that we should be looking at when we look at authentic learning and authentic assessments. So the assessment here was for each child to understand that we need a standardized measurement to continue with understanding what is that unit that we need, so that if I have a bigger hand and you have a smaller one, how do we get the unit or the length of the playground right? So that is what the wonder and the inquiry can do to your classroom. It just turns it around to something where the children want to investigate, the children want to experiment and come to that conclusion. We also are looking at differentiated learning. So when we look at assessments or authentic assessments, we have to understand that in open-ended tasks, there is no right or wrong. There is only a point where you can take the children up from where they are already at a particular time. So you need to understand in your classroom that you need to yourself value the perspectives. Unlike the English teacher who was doing the poem with the children, you have to understand that each answer, even if it is right, is very useful and very important for the learning in the classroom. So if a child gets a wrong answer, you have to make sure that you ask another one, do you think that answer is right? If it is not right, what do you think is the right answer? And can both of you get together and create an answer which actually follows the principle or the process or the experiment that we are doing. So we need to understand your mindset, your attitude, and of course the children's perspectives in the classroom are very important when you're building a situation or you're building an environment in the classroom where authentic assessment can be done. It should be an environment where there is no threat. I can very comfortably say an answer or talk about a certain thing without having the fear that the teachers or the children are going to make fun of me. So this again is a very important and a pertinent point in when we talk about authentic assessments. So here again, here I want you to talk about you to listen to how you will look at skills and competencies. We spoke about skills and competencies in the previous webinar. So how do you make sure that of course you have your cognitive part of the lesson which is catered to, you have learning objectives, you know that the children have a certain kind of a curriculum that they need to follow. But if there are certain skills that you want to do, we need to integrate skills and competencies as well. So how do you do that? I'll just show you another example wherein here again the children have a shared folder, and you can divide the children in various classrooms and various groups rather, and you can have them research on the various animals or processes or experiments that you're talking about. So they all get together, they have a scribe, they have a person who is actually investigating, there's a person who's going on to the web research. So all of this is group work, and I will show you how group work also needs to be assessed. But what I'm trying to say here is the children are doing collaborative work, and I'm sure for the last 1.5 years of COVID, all of you have done amazing things in the digital world, virtual world. But these are the kind of things wherein you can get your skills and competencies done. We were talking about the various strategies and pedagogies that need to be done, but I am introducing you to the skills and competencies as well, that when you devise. So in the example that I just showed you, there were 4 animals that we were looking at, amphibians that we were looking at. So maybe that's my curriculum, that's a chapter in my book. But if I have to look at collaboration, communication, research, critical thinking, decision making, I have to take these skills in mind when I'm planning. So the planning stage, before you actually go and execute your lesson, you have to get the mindset right, you have to get the classroom right, you have to get the perspectives right, you have to get the children to feel non-threatened in the classroom, and you also have to get your skills and competencies in your planning before you actually get the strategy and the assessment to that right. So that was the intention of showing you the example. We are looking at the brains here. There is a normal brain and a brain with extreme neglect. Here, the point that I'm trying to make is that most of us think, let the children learn the alphabet, let the children learn 1 to 20. So let them do the pre-numeracy and pre-literacy concepts. And, all these skills, critical thinking and all of this, we will do later. But we must understand that the brain is actually wired in a certain way. The brain, when it works, and we all know that most of your learning, some 90% of your learning is done by the time you are 6 years old. So try and make your pedagogy, that whatever strategy that you're trying to do in the classroom, make sure that it relates to what the children are reading at that stage and age, what they're seeing, what they're doing, what they are experiencing at this point in time. And that is the only way you will get them to actually arrive at an authentic learning experience. So when we talk about this firing and the wiring of the brain, what is that that we are actually looking at? So I'm going to break down this entire learning and thinking process for you, so that you can understand the pedagogies that we are looking at in three types of learning. So we are still at pedagogy. Once we are looking at the progressive pedagogies in each one of these, the understanding of information, the manipulating of information, and the generation of information from the children. That's the higher order thinking skill, where the children understand, they manipulate the data that they have, and they actually generate their own learning. That is where the deeper learning takes place. So what I've done is the progressive pedagogies that we are talking about, I've split them into three areas, and we are going to look at an example of each one of them and look at the assessment points in that. So we will start from the understanding of information. So how do you plan a classroom where the learning objectives, learning outcomes, assessments, all of that are planned, but we are looking at the first crux of learning, that is when the child understands the information. So there are a few things that I have taken into account. Now, we all do this, right? We recall, we summarize, we symbolize, we categorize, we do role taking in the classroom. I've taken just a few examples of understanding information, but we are going to look at these activities and we are going to link the assessment to them. How are we going to do authentic assessment with this kind of an activity? So here we are looking at the Indus Valley, right? So you have got the children to observe. So you're getting them to observe and you will get them to recall. So they will see this picture, they will make notes, they will understand, there is a village and it's next to a river. There are few people who are doing farming. There are some people who are, fishing. So looking at the occupation. So you get them to think very, very closely, and you take the picture off. And then you ask them questions like this. Now, these are not recall questions. Please see the quality of the questions. Now, where were the houses built? Now, you will understand that the children need to understand that where there was a river, the houses were next to the river. And if you look at civilizations around the world, most of them are next to rivers. So why? Why is that? How were the fields irrigated? What were the houses made of? What were the roofs made of? What was the main occupation of the people in the picture? Which animals were domesticated in the village? And what are the utensils made of, and why do you think so? Now, here the steel and the alloy and all of that will come into action. And here we are looking at retrieving the information. It's just not recall, as Bloom says, right? It's more than that. So how are you getting them to retrieve? How are you getting them to recall, reflect on that picture? And finally, when they reflect, the self-reflection that we were talking about, how do they refine their answers? So it is just not, finishing with what do you think was the main occupation of this village? Farming, fishing, rowing, or whatever, and done. No. The recalling also, which is the understanding, the lowest rung of the Bloom's taxonomy, that also can be made so powerful, so authentic, that the assessment of this only will give you a very good idea as to what the children are talking about. So here, please make sure that when you are doing a simple recall, the quality of the questions is such. Put some thought into it and make it into a very, very deeper learning activity, where the children are looking at questions and they are analyzing, they are thinking, they are making two and together, and it's okay if they get it wrong. Because after that, once you have a check for learning and you say that most of the children have got question number 5 wrong, so that is your lesson plan for tomorrow. So it's assessment of your own use of resources as well, not only what the children are doing at that point in time. Look at this example. Now, this is also something that I'm sure the English teachers do. So you summarize. So you read a story, or the children have read a story. Who was that somebody? What did that character want? But what happened? So how did they solve the problem? And then what was the solution? So here the children are not only summarizing, they are understanding sequencing. They are understanding the sequence of events. So sequence in itself is something that the children need to understand, and that sequence will come in handy for your maths, will come in handy for your coding. That sequence the children who they are learning in a literacy class. So summarizing activity is just not that, just not summarizing a chapter. There are a lot of skill sets which are involved in that, and a lot of skill sets that you can involve in that. Now here is a strip, very simple activity. You cut these strips and give them to one child each and let them categorize it. Are they multiples of 7? Are they prime numbers? What is this that I'm talking about? Are they multiples of 9? Are they multiples of 8? What are they? So let them sequence this. Now once they're doing this, they are not only looking at prime numbers or multiples of 7 or 8 or whatever that you have planned for them. They are looking at categorizing things. They are looking, so you are assessing them for categorizing. So that is something which should be of utmost importance, because categorizing is something which they will start doing in class 1 and they will keep doing till class 12. The content will change, that will become more difficult, but the skill set will stay. How do you categorize? What is your reasoning for that? So this is something which can be done very easily. Here this is an integration example wherein you get each child to represent a word and then you convert this in Hindi. So once you convert it in Hindi, you will understand that every word does not have a corresponding word in Hindi. So the languages, how do the languages flow? What are the rules that we need to take ahead? Now, if you are doing something like this is very, very kinesthetic. So the role taking of the person who was I and was a capital I, the child will always understand that if I'm starting a sentence and it's with the letter I, it has to be a capital. The full stop will always be there if you do something like that. So here what you're doing is in the assessment, you are getting the children not to showcase the language part of it, but the punctuation part of it. So this punctuation again is not related to class 1. This is something which will carry on. The capital is always there, the full stop is always there, there is a sequence, there is a subject, there is a predicate. Whatever you want to level that you want to take this up to, you can do it in the classroom. But make sure that this simple activity has an authentic assessment attached to it. So once we are done with the first bit of it, now we are looking at manipulating information. Now here you will look at analyzing, applying, inducing, deducing, and problem solving. So these are a few examples that I have taken. And the example that I've taken in this particular case is this very famous project, a worldwide project, which talks about eat local and think global. Now here, it talks about, when you, so the very simple example you can do is you can get the children to get maybe a carton from home and let them read the ingredients at the back of it. So something like, mango, and I'm in Sikkim right now. So here we don't have mangoes very much as we have in Jammu and Kashmir or in UP or in maybe Punjab. So if I have to create a factory here which makes mango juice, I will have to get mangoes from that distance. So how much petrol or diesel is being wasted? How many resources are being wasted? Human hours are being resources. So this is the basic idea behind this project. So you can get the children to think about analyzing that situation. So here also your authentic assessment will be if you can take an example from your own locality, your own community. Then you get them to apply that knowledge that they have received. Now we can talk about terrace gardening, right? We can talk about we should eat local and think global. But if I'm living in a city like Mumbai, is that practical for us? What can we do instead? So get them to apply that knowledge to something else. And each level that you are taking them through, this is progressive pedagogy, and you're getting them to do authentic assessment as they go, as they answer these questions. And then you can get them to do a KWL chart. This is just one example that I'm taking through, and all the skill sets are being satisfied with it. So we've got the children to create what I want to know, what I know, what I already know, what I want to know, and what I have learned as a matter of the process or the project that I'm doing. Now, this can be a live board which gets the children to put on their chits as they go. Now, this board in itself is assessment. Now, if I want to assess a group of children who are working on a particular facet of this project, or if you want all of them to do the same project, it's perfectly all right. But make sure that the children have learning objectives, they know what they have to do, and they have some rubrics wherein they can talk about what are they doing and if they're going the right way. So they should know what are the assessment bits to it. The children should be party to that. And as they are going and making this live board, they are being assessed simultaneously. So this is something which can have self-assessment, it can have teacher assessment, and it can have peer assessment as well. So this was about manipulating the information. How do they generate information? So this is higher order thinking skills, where you talk about brainstorming. How do you have your own perspectives? How do you synthesize? How do you predict? How do you evaluate? And how do you get questioning? So questioning also generates a lot of information. So how do you do that? Brainstorming, you also must be doing in the classroom. I'm very fond of a strategy which we use very frequently, which is the AMP box, the active mental participation, where you can get the children to, have all the children's names in this box, and you pick up names for the children to talk. So they can give their questions or their reflections at any point in time. For brainstorming, you can also do something like a mind map. So you give them a central idea, and as a group, they do their mind mapping. You can also use this brainstorming activity beautifully for solving problems. So how do you find what are the problems that are being faced by a certain situation, and what are the various solutions to it? Example of mind mapping could be this, the 6 W's, where we talk about what, who, where. No, this is 5 W's and an H, where you can talk about the brainstorming, give them this mind map wherein they can work on this as a group. So starbursting is an example. I'm going to give you some more examples in the same criteria, with the same criteria. Now here is storyboarding. Now, when we talk about storyboarding, it is not only just English. Storyboarding can be used for maths, it can be used for science, because it is organizing, it's about organizing your ideas. So when you do a lesson in the classroom and you give them 3 pictures, 3 storyboard rectangles, and you say, can you sum up the lesson in these 3 rectangles? And that is your assessment. How much have they got? What is something which is still lacking? So what are the main 3 storyboard ideas? Can you draw 3 pictures and explain the concept to me? So going visual on that. So storyboarding can be one of the things. We also do group sketching, which is really, really interesting, and it gets the children to explore further. So what you could do is you can create a group, give them a sheet, and each member draws something, and then this is passed to the next person who actually sketches another image. But this is all related to the concept that you're talking about. And here, as the images as the group sketching is developing, the teacher can stop them at that point in time and say, okay, so this is sort of a formative. So you can say, this is not going right. I want to interject at this point in time, and I want to discuss this, or I want to show you this video, or I want Arjun to stand up and explain this. So you are giving them constructive feedback as the group sketching is going on. So this part of authentic assessment is inbuilt. So this is something which can be done very easily in the classroom. Then we have spoken about brainstorming, but I just wanted to talk about the round robin as well, wherein, you know, one person shares an idea, and then you wait for someone else before suggesting a second idea. So here what happens is that you ensure that every child is saying something, and you make sure that everybody speaks rather than only the few dominant ones. And here what you can do is in the smaller classes till class 8, you can have the talking stones. So you have, when you're doing the brainstorming, each child is given 2 marbles or 3 stones, colored stones. If you want to make that into a project, you know, get the children to paint the stones and keep them in a bowl in their classroom. So when you talk, every time you talk, you have to put the stone in the bowl. And once all the stones in your hand have gone, you can't speak. So the children who still have the stones in their hands, they have to speak to make contribution to the discussion which is happening. So this is something wherein you can move this to 2 days or 2 periods that you have, and you can very easily do individual assessment, very pure, very something which will give you a formative overview of where the child is with his or her learning. This one here is a fun thing that the children can do. It's Scamper. It's an acronym. So what you do here is, it works very well with science and with maths, but you can try it with the other subject areas as well. But maths, science, computer science is something that it works beautifully with. So if you substitute something in the process, what will happen? If you combine 2 things, what will happen? If you adapt a few things in this project, what would happen? So what do you predict? If you modify, how will you modify it to create more value? If you eliminate something from this project, what will happen? If you reverse the project, the way that you are, reorganize this project, do you think it will make it more effective? This is a powerful activity or a progressive pedagogy that can be used to get the children thinking critically. They can absolutely, shred the activity apart and get into deeper learning. So Scamper, all these activities are there in the Google Classroom. So there's no need to take snapshots. They are available as a PDF because I want you to use them in your classroom. So the details are there. This one here again, you must have used a form of this in your classroom. It's called the charrette, wherein it's also known as the jigsaw. So what you do is you break the big problem that you have into smaller chunks, and the small groups, they discuss one element of the problem. And once that is done, they pass the ideas to the next group, which builds on it. So slowly and gradually what happens is, if you have 5 groups, you get them to move 5 or 6 times, and by the time the circle finishes, all the ideas, all the 4 or 5 small ideas have been discussed by all the children. And once you read that that sheet of paper, that can be an amazing formative assessment for you to see where the children are going. And then you can use whatever suppose group A has started a certain thing on one chunk of information, you can then split them again into different groups and get them to create maybe a research paper or a project or a 3D model or a diorama or a poem or whatever on the topic that we are talking about, because now they have discussed their part of it, and then they will do and integrate some other bit of topic into it, and hence the deeper learning will take place. The zero draft, I know there are lots and lots of ideas, but I want you to be exposed to this in context with the assessment which can take place as a formative or a summative. Most of the things that I'm discussing here are formative. They are self-reflection. They are going to be peer feedback as well, because summatives are something which we are very much set on. We know the question paper, we get a blueprint from our boards, and we know how to set that bit. But if you are doing formative assessment for the children, what you are actually doing is you're getting them to think about various strategies like self-reflection and peer feedback, which will get them not only ready for class 7, 8, 9, but it will get them ready for life. So that is the idea of exposing you all to these activities, so that you can use some of them in your classroom, and slowly and gradually build up your repertoire of strategies which can be used in the classroom. Now here, the zero draft is something which can be used as a prior knowledge check, wherein you get the children to write down what they know about the subject, write down what they want to know, so quite like the KWL chart, and reflect on why the subject is important. So here, when you do a zero draft, you can do this at the beginning of a lesson, and your prior knowledge check formative assessment is done. So very useful, and something that you can do very easily without much planning for it. This is something which can be used from, I would say, class 6 onwards, wherein the 5 questions strategy, which will get the children again to think about various ways of going deeper into the problem that they are looking at. So if you look at this learning concept here, we are talking about local citizenship. So in local citizenship, the question is, how can we get young people involved in the community? So the answer, it promotes issues which interest. How do you get them interested? Is that you get them to promote issues which interest young people. So this answer here then again becomes a question. How can we promote issues? So the answer is raise awareness of youth issues. So this answer then becomes a question. How do we raise the awareness? Develop an online forum. And then the question becomes, how do we develop an online forum? So when you go deeper into like the layers of learning like this, the children can keep going on and devising their own problem areas. You will see that some of the groups get stuck, or some of the children get stuck at level 1. So that only shows that their knowledge at this point in time is superficial. You will need to give them more resources like readings or videos, or more exposure to the topic before you can get them to do the 5 questions again. So this will again serve as a check for learning for you, wherein you can straight away find out if the children are doing well or not. Brainwriting, here again, the participants write a few rough ideas for solving a problem, and the paper again is passed to someone. That person reads it and writes their own idea, and it keeps going on till everybody has written on this. So this idea which has come can be done maybe in the middle of a topic or towards the end of the topic, and then you can photocopy this entire thing where children have written their notes, and you can give it to maybe 4 groups, and then give them something which is summative. So they have everything that the classroom thinks about on a sheet of paper. They have that as a reference point, so that they are supported with ideas. If some of the things there are not correct, let them debate about that and say why those things are not correct. Let them give a rationale. So this brainwriting actually becomes a very, very sort of a strong thing for the children to look at, for the children to brainstorm all that we were talking about at the beginning. They can also create a mind map of this, talk about why certain things can fit in and why certain things are not fitting in. So all of that can be taken care of. So brain writing, another, holistic, summative sort of a strategy. This is something which is very common, and I'm sure you've been doing it in the classroom as well, but this is about synthesizing. So the strategy is called clustering. So what happens is in this one is, I'm going to give you an example here. So this is something that I have created as a printout. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this along these strips. So I have done this topic of Safdarjung, the India Gate, the Red Fort. I've done all of that. Now I take that information here and I cut this into slips, and I give one slip to a child which is all jumbled up. So one child will get one strip of India Today, India Gate, one strip of Tomb of Safdarjung. So each one of them will get an unrelated sort of a strip. So what they need to do is that they need to form a connection with another child. So I will go around the classroom. You will need space for this, and I will find out if I've got India Gate. I will look for those attributes which the teacher had taught in the class, or we had seen a video in the class wherein we are looking at information for Red Fort or India Gate or the Tomb of Safdarjung. So we get together, we look at the statements, we form a cluster. After forming the clusters, we see the patterns and we see the connections. So please look at the keywords. The children are seeing patterns. These are recognizing patterns is a skill, making connections is a skill. The children can give a title to their cluster, what they have introduced, and then as a group or a subgroup, they will present, or they can make a flip chart, or they can enact whatever that you have got them to read. And after this is done, it's very important, because it is an activity which is free flowing in the classroom, and then it comes together into groups. So a debrief of that kind will be good. And if the debrief is by the children, you can have an assessment of sorts in that as well. So predicting, this is something, telling them the story and let them predict what's going to happen in the story. Or you can get them to do, tell them the name of the story and let them predict what the answer is going to be, the story is going to be, or tell them the entire story and ask them what the end is going to be. Because see, the stories will change, but prediction as a skill set will stay with the children. So we are assessing them for prediction. So how do you, we do all of these activities in the classroom. What we don't do is we don't associate them with a skill, and we don't associate them with an assessment. So we have to make sure that whatever strategies that I have spoken to you about today and the ones that you're doing in the classroom normally, please make sure that they are integrated in your learning objective. Please make sure that they are attached to a piece of assessment, and what skill set, what skills and competencies are you integrating in this plan. Here again, predictions. So for the very little ones, will it sink, will it float, the weather forecast, draw a picture of what you predict will happen next in the story. So all of this is the prediction skill. Here again, this is from my classroom, wherein the children had, this is logo programming, where the children were given a set of instructions and they had to guess where in the treasure island will this logo turtle go. So that can be done in evaluating. Mind maps can be done. You can get them to do situations, and you are assessing just the mind map that they have gathered from. They are evaluating the man's impact, and you are evaluating their learning. So there is double layered evaluation or assessment happening here. Questioning, this is something which I feel is the strongest kind of an assessment that can be done in the classroom. The project here in my class was they were talking about Vikings, and they were uh, talking to a museum in York, where the Viking Museum is. And we told the children that they had to write 5 questions for this person who will appear from the museum. And on the day, this was in the afternoon, on the day of the session, we told them that they can ask only 1 question. So decision making, from 5 questions, they had to come on to one. And the amount of thought that went into this entire thing, where the children spoke about, what is the most common name, like, in India, Ram, or in Britain, John, or Sam is our common name. So what was the common name then? So questioning is something which you can plan in such a way. This is, of course, from the foundation of critical thinking. It's a very, very sort of a good ready reckoner that you can have in your classroom. If you are looking for clarity, these are all skills that you're looking at for questions. Like, if you want the children to give you more clarity, so you can ask questions like, can you elaborate further? Can you give me an example? Can you illustrate? For accuracy, you can say, how could we check on it? How could we find if it is true? How can we verify or test that? So these questions are very simple. There's one set of questions for precision. Then there are questions for relevance. There are questions for depth. There are questions for depth, logic, significance, and fairness. Fairness about, having your perceptions, your viewpoints that are not subjected to questions all the time, because you as an individual can give your perspective and be right about it, and also carry on with what investigation that you want to do. It's all right if you are proved wrong at the end, but the process of learning is important. So all these strategies that I have spoken to you about, along with the assessment sets, are available in the Google Classroom. You may access them once this session is done. So we will talk about what are the benefits. Of course, it reinforces the curriculum content. It warms up the brain for learning. There's deeper learning which happens of the content. So you're not only learning about the solar system, you're going much, much deeper than that. You are also looking at integration. When you provide that student agency, it builds the initiative and self-direction, because at most point in time, you will get them to reflect, so that, where am I right now, and where do I need to go? So it works in almost any classroom. Progressive pedagogy, pedagogies are one such thing which can be used in any subject area, any class level. Or you can say that it can be used outside the classroom, inside the classroom, everywhere that you can think of. And also it offers you the differentiated classroom instruction. So you can, because you're looking at learner profiles, you're looking at different ways of doing things, you can think of differentiating according to the interests. And we spoke about that. And most importantly, why I'm talking about this is because all the progressive pedagogies that are there, that are relevant, they have inbuilt assessment in them. And when we talk about assessment, authentic assessment, that is going to come in your planning. How do you integrate your progressive pedagogy in such a way that your assessment is done in the most fantastic way, which actually is not something which is put on. It is something which is natural. It is something which the child says, okay, I have reached this point in my project, miss. Can I please reflect and see if I'm going right? That is something that you should aspire for, where the child himself says that he wants or she wants to first find out if I have come the right way. So this is something which we need to understand. And I want to just show you another example of, gathering the various things. So most of us in this virtual world find it very difficult when the children, are saying things. There are 40 children in the classroom and you can't hear all of them. But valuing differences is something that we were talking about. And what I've done here is I have just attached Screencastify. That is an app in the Chrome store. You can just link it to that, make an assignment for the children. And what it does is it just records gives the children a mic and a webcam, and I've asked them to reflect, and they just turn this on and they record with the mic and the webcam, and they put the assignment in. And as they reflect on the topic that we are talking about, that is accumulated, and there are just 30 seconds of their feedback or their reflection. So you can just listen to that very quickly and make your notes about where they are with their learning and what are they thinking at that point in time. And this is, again, a formative assessment which can be done very quickly. So I'm going to skip this. My last bit of discussion today is creating a rubric. We have spoken about how can we give this rubric to the children so that they know from the very beginning that whatever we are learning, whatever planning that the teacher has designed for me, whatever that I am doing at this point in time, how will that come into ahead of me, and I will be able to assess it for my own self. So rubric, as you know, a lot of you will be using these in the classroom, that you have levels 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you have the criteria. What are the various criteria that you should be setting for a particular project, so that when you actually get the children going on a project, they know exactly that if I'm going to do a presentation, this is what is going to be marked, and these are the various levels of performance which are going to be actually seen. So there are two ways that you can create the various kind of performances which can be assessed. One is the processes. You can assess the processes which are happening, like playing a musical instrument, or preparing a slide on the microscope, or making a speech, or reading aloud. So these are the processes working independently. Or you can create a rubric for products, like you have a handmade apron, or you have a laboratory report, or you have a term paper, or you have a written analysis, or you've done a mind map or a concept map. So there are two kind of things, the types of performances which can be used to create a rubric, so that they can be assessed, the processes and the products. So these are the two kinds, and there are 4 kinds of rubrics. So I'm going to talk about the 4 kinds of rubrics as to how they can be defined and what do they look like. So the first kind of rubric is holistic. So it takes everything. So whatever that you are doing in the classroom or in the learning, it takes everything, the dimension, the traits, everything is done together. So it's a holistic, as the name suggests, wherein you are doing a project. So your presentation, the way that you collected the resources, the way you gave your answers, the way you finished your assignments, everything is done on that. So scoring in this one is faster. It requires less time because of the inter-rater reliability. That is, how much am I rating and how much do you rate on it? And it is good for summative assessment. But what it does, the overall score doesn't give me the need that I have for a particular kind of thing. And it is not a very good formative assessment rubric, because I do not know where I need more work. So that is your holistic rubric. There is one rubric called the analytic rubric, wherein there is a criteria which is evaluated separately. So it gives a rubric to the teacher. What is that diagnostic information about that particular criteria that we are talking about, gives formative assessment feedback to the children. It links the instruction. It is a good form of formative assessment, but it takes a whole lot of time. because the scoring becomes more and it takes more time to achieve the inter-rater reliability, because here there is only one criteria. I might have a different kind of opinion than what you do. Now these notes are also there in case, I'm just reading this out to you, but I know some of you, many of us will not remember what this is. So these notes are available in the Google Classroom as well for you to go back and refer to. Now there is this task specific rubric as well. So there's a particular task that we are doing, like giving an answer or specifying a conclusion. So we create a rubric just for that. So teachers say that when you use this, scoring becomes easier. And what I am saying on it, maybe you are also saying that in a lesser amount of data or sets that we are doing. It just gets it easier to do. We cannot share this with the student, because if it is task specific, we are actually defining that this is what you need to do and you will get your answer. So this is not student centric. So this is something which is for the teacher. You have to write a new rubric each time you change the task. And for open-ended tasks that you need to do, and in most of the progressive pedagogies you have open-ended tasks, the good answers are not listed in the which are not listed in the rubrics are not evaluated because they are not there. So mostly what people do is they use the general rubrics. So in general rubrics, which work very well for the entire school, suppose for the middle school, you have a rubric for presentation. So you can use that for an English presentation, you can use it for a math presentation, you can use it for any presentation of any kind. If you're looking at creating or writing a story, that rubric can be used for any story that is being written in Hindi, English, French, German, or Sanskrit, and the same rubric can be used as well. So majorly people try and use the general rubric, which you can share with the students right at the beginning and tell them this is what is the expectation. The same rubric can be used for different tasks. When you actually get the children to have this 5 4 3 2 1, and 5 4 3 2 1 is defined, that if my presentation is at this level, I'm going to get a 4 for it. So it just becomes easier for them to do self-evaluation as well. And I would suggest that these kind of general rubrics should not only be shared with the children at the beginning, they should be created by them as well. So the negatives, of course, is that you might have a subjectivity to the task that you are doing. And of course, to be able to do this again and again, you need a lot of practice. So I'm going to look at a certain criteria. So what are we looking at when we look at the rubric? There is a criteria, I said, and I said there are descriptors and there are performance levels. So let's have a look at this. So you look at this thing here, and if you're looking at rubrics, the credit here goes to the Buck Institute of Education, which is very famous for PBL. And here, if you see that the explanation of ideas, the organization, the body and eyes, all these are different criteria. These are the criteria that you have chosen for presentation. The below standard, above standard, at standard, this can be a 5 4 3 2 1. So these are the levels of proficiency that you want. And these are the descriptors. So if I'm looking at eyes and body, and I'm looking at below standard, does not look at audience, reads notes, fidgets, or slouches a lot. So when I'm looking at below standard, eye and body, this is what I'm going to get. So the children find this very easy to relate to. And if you are doing storytelling or story writing like 2 or 3 times in 5th, 6th, 7th, and you have the same general rubric that you're using, by the time the children reach 7th and 8th level, they know exactly what is the expectation from them. Hence, most of the schools like to use a general rubric so that the children actually get confident in doing it, and they actually perform in a way that makes it easy for them, because this rubric is so easy for them to follow and to remember. So have a look at this. This is a 1 criteria rubric. Here I've taken a maths example of fractions. Here we are looking at operations. So a person in this bracket will add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions which are with like or unlike denominators. Then we have another bracket here which says add, subtract, multiply fractions with unlike or like. So here the division has gone away. Now, if I look here, it says add and subtract only with like, unlike, and the final one here is only with like denominators. Now, this is something the children can do on their own. They know at which level they are at this point in time when they're solving the problem. So this is a very simple example of taking a single criteria and making it a self-reflection form for the children. As I move ahead, for student self-reflection, please have a look at this. The directions are you have edit your written work using the self-edit columns, fixing any errors that you notice, then have a pair complete the pair edit columns. Now here you are doing your self-check. So here, what are the punctuation things that you need to do? What are the capitals that you need to, capital letters that you need to check? What's the grammar? What are the spellings? Do I need a check there as well? And then you do a pair do the same thing for you. After you've done that, you have this very fancy thing where you can write your comments and your signature as well. And that gives you a lot of, leadership sort of a quality to say, I'm doing a checking for my child. Now, to be able to do this, I must know this myself. So when they say teaching is the best form of learning. So when you have done your own work, you are going to check another person's work as well. But we usually do that in the class. We say, okay, now exchange your sheets and now do your peer assessment. It should never be done without a checklist or a rubric. The children should know the expectation. They should know what they're doing and why they're doing it. Here again, this is again a beautiful example that I found in one of the research papers where you are doing a Venn diagram and you will look at, these are your criteria and these are the various things that you are looking at. So the text is supported by the comparison statements. The placement of statements are within the Venn diagram, the number of quality statements which are there. So the children were able to make 4 or 5 comparisons. That's your first strong grasp in the quality of the number of quality statements. So if you look at this progressing, students are able to make only 3 or 4 statements. If you look at this one here, all statements are supported by the text. So the children, where they're doing the comparison of statements, they have a very strong grasp for that. So this also is a rubric for doing a peer evaluation on Venn diagrams, which is something most of us don't think about doing. For maths, I found this example, and instead of showing a rubric, I thought this would be something which you all will find value in. When you get the children to self-evaluate or peer evaluate, or mostly, when you get them to think about the work that they're doing, you can have a check for accuracy questions, checklist for them. You can have a check for understanding and giving clarity. Which words are important, where do you think we should start, what is the goal of this problem, and of course, once they reach this level, the prove it questions. So the children have got the answers, so push them for their thinking. Can you explain that? What is the support of your thinking? So this is something which you can do for your GNT learners. So the assessment or the work or an assignment or a worksheet is done, you can give these questions to your gifted and talented, where the children who are, so here your differentiation will happen. You will have some set questions which are already there, where they're not necessarily doing maths. So this is something where they are, thinking about their learning, which is very important. What we do is, in most classes, children have done the 10 questions, we'll give them 10 more, right? What we are not doing is we are not letting them reflect on what was the procedure, what did they do, what was the actual thinking behind the process. Once you let them think, once you let them assess, they will never forget that task because they would have thought through. Here, when you're doing projects, most of you say that, when we do group projects, children don't actually, work. Some of them work and some of them don't work. So this is a very good self-evaluation for that, wherein it says, how did you contribute to the project? Did you listen to your classmates? Did you come prepared? What task did you specifically complete in this project? What do you think was your biggest or your greatest strength? What do you think was your weakness? If you need to defend any of your answers, write your comment here. So on top of this, there is another group evaluation that you must do. So after you've done your self-evaluation, you have to write what each member has done. So when you say, there are 5 boys or girls in a group, 3 of them work, 2 of them don't. But if they have something like this, the group evaluation grid or a checklist, they will know that once the group evaluation is going to be done, when the project is over, I will get an evaluation sheet like this. So the assessment becomes easier for the teacher, and the child knows from the beginning that I will be evaluated thus. So this is something which will get them to work. This is something which will get them to actually work on their projects, their group projects. So I was talking about progressive pedagogies, and I've given you related assessment, authentic assessments to gauge that. And when we are talking about the success criteria, we must have that displayed for the children. This is my last slide, that when you talk about how will you be successful in the learning that we are doing in the classroom, please make sure that the children know what they're learning. The children should have the overview. What is the specific intention that we are doing? What is the success criteria for that? What are the things that I will be evaluated then by the teacher or by the peers? And to be successful, to achieve success in this area that we are talking about, what is that I will need to do? So this is something which should be displayed. This should be something that the children should know. This is something that the children should have as a ready reckoner when they are learning anything that you have designed for them in the classroom. So that's it for today. The webinar number 2 that we were talking about for planning for your assessment, and we spoke about a whole lot of strategies. We spoke about a whole lot of assessment related to the strategies, and we will be meeting again on the 29th of this month for assessment strategies. So purely assessment strategies. Here I started with webinar 1, where I spoke about planning the entire process. In the second one, I linked the learning to the assessment tasks. And in the third webinar, I will be talking about only the assessment in totality. And in this one, we will be talking about self-assessments. We will be talking about peer assessment. We will talk about group assessment. And finally, the most important piece in progressive pedagogies, we will be talking about the constructive feedback. How do we give constructive feedback? How do the children take their feedback? And I think it is very important that we create, like I said, the non-threatening culture in the classroom, where if you are wrong, it's okay, because a teacher or a peer will show you the way. And that is how we want the society at large to work as well. And in our own little pockets, in our own little classrooms and schools, we can make that happen. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining in today. And that's it from me. And we hope that there has been some learning, whereas planning the assessment is concerned. And I will be seeing you on the 29th of October. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deepti ma'am. There has been a lot of learning, not some. It has been a wonderful session. We thank you and look forward to your next session. And thank you, Puchika ma'am, for being there with us all through. And I also thank the participants, and I hope they will take something from these sessions and that will help them in their actual practice. Thank you all so much.
Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.